Did you eat today? 4 words. That's all it took to destroy every wall she had ever built. She had walked into that garage ready to beg, ready to be laughed at, ready to be turned away like every single time before. The man in front of her had tattoos crawling up his neck and eyes like stone walls. The whole town had warned her. Stay away from those bikers. They'll eat a girl like you alive. But nobody warned her about those 4 words. Nobody warned her that the most dangerous man in Blackstone would be the first one to ask if she was hungry. If this story is already hitting different, hit that subscribe button right now and follow Emily's journey all the way to the end. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's get into it. The morning Emily Carter turned the key in her ignition and heard nothing. Not even a cough, not even a sputter, just dead silence. She didn't cry. She had used up all her tears somewhere around the 3rd week of sleeping in the back seat with a gas station blanket and an empty stomach. Crying felt like a luxury she couldn't afford anymore. So instead, she just sat there, both hands still wrapped around the steering wheel, staring straight ahead at the cracked windshield. And she thought, okay, what now? That was how Emily Carter's life worked. No dramatic breakdowns, no one rushing in to help. Just that flat, exhausted voice inside her head, asking what now like a broken record that had forgotten every other song it used to know. She was 17 years old. She had $11.43 in her coat pocket. She had not eaten a real meal in 2 days. The car was a 2003 Honda Civic that her former foster mother, Linda, had technically given to her when the state stopped paying, which really meant Linda had handed her the keys and said, "Good luck, honey," with that tight smile that never reached her eyes, and then closed the door of the house that had never really been Emily's home anyway. The Civic had broken down 3 days ago on the outskirts of Millhaven. Emily had managed to coast it into a parking lot behind a dollar store, and that parking lot had been her address ever since. She had tried the shelter on 5th Street. They told her she needed documentation she didn't have. She had tried calling the one number she had for a caseworker disconnected. She had gone to the church on Maple where a woman with kind eyes handed her a sandwich and then very gently told her they didn't have beds available and suggested she try a town 30 miles away. 30 miles on foot in November. So Emily Carter stayed in her parking lot and she rationed her $11.43 like it was gold. And every morning she woke up and asked herself, what now? That particular Tuesday morning, the answer came from the ugliest source imaginable. She was sitting on the hood of the dead Civic, eating the last of a sleeve of crackers, watching the town of Millhaven slowly wake up around her. A man walking his dog gave her a long look and crossed to the other side of the street. A woman in a minivan slowed down, stared, then drove on. Emily had learned to become invisible to these glances. She pulled her oversized jacket tighter and kept eating her crackers one by one, making them last when she heard the sound. Motorcycles. Not one or two. A whole cluster of them rumbling through the intersection at the end of the block, loud enough to rattle the fillings in your teeth. She watched them pass big men on big bikes, patches on their backs, moving through the town like a slow river of thunder, and then they turned one by one down a side street she had never paid attention to before. She glanced at the sign on the corner building. Blackstone Garage, Auto Repair and Restoration. The paint was peeling, the awning was torn. The parking lot out front had 3 rusted vehicles that looked like they hadn't moved since the Clinton administration. But taped to the window, half hidden behind a grease stain, and what looked like a year's worth of dust, was a small, handwritten sign. Help wanted. Cleaning. Daily rate. Emily stared at that sign for a long time. She thought about every warning she had absorbed in the 4 days she'd been drifting around Millhaven's edges. The woman at the dollar store checkout who had lowered her voice and said, "Stay away from those bikers at Blackstone, they're dangerous, honey." The man at the gas station who had shaken his head and said, "That garage has trouble written all over it." The shelter worker who had said, "Lord, don't you go anywhere near those hellsangels boys." Emily sat on her dead car in her parking lot with 3 crackers left in the sleeve and $11.43 to her name. Dangerous, she thought. Okay. She folded the crackers into her pocket and walked toward the sign. The garage was even more intimidating up close. The roll-up doors were massive, both of them open, pouring out the sounds of metal on metal, and something that smelled like motor oil and cigarette smoke and old coffee. 2 motorcycles were parked sideways near the entrance, like they owned the whole block, which Emily suspected they basically did. She could hear voices inside low mail, the kind of voices that had weight to them. She stopped just outside the entrance. She could feel her heartbeat in her throat. This is a terrible idea, she thought. This is the worst idea you've ever had. Then she thought about the parking lot, the crackers, the dead car, the shelter that needed documentation, the caseworker whose phone was disconnected. Walk in, she told herself. Just walk in. She walked in. The garage was large and cluttered in a way that felt almost organized, like chaos, that had rules she didn't understand yet. Tools hung on pegboards. Engines sat on stands in various states of disassembly. A vintage motorcycle chassis was suspended from the ceiling on a chain hoist frozen midair like a metal animal in flight. There were 3 men visible, one underneath a truck on a roller dolly leg sticking out. One at a workbench with his back to her shoulders so wide he looked like he'd been built out of spare parts, and one leaning against a support column with the arms crossed and his eyes already on her like he'd heard her coming before she'd even made it through the door. That one was Tank. She would learn his name later. Right then, all she knew was that he was the largest human being she had ever seen in person. 6'4" at minimum, built like a piece of industrial equipment with tattoos running from his knuckles, up his arms, and disappearing under the sleeves of a black t-shirt that had seen better days. He had a scar that ran from his left jawline up toward his cheekbone. His hair was dark and his eyes were darker, and he was looking at her with an expression that was completely unreadable. He said nothing. Emily's entire body was screaming at her to turn around and leave. She made herself take one more step forward. "I saw your sign," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "The cleaning job, the daily rate." Silence. From under the truck, the man on the dolly rolled out partway, peering at her with oil-streaked cheeks and eyebrows raised in what looked like genuine surprise. He was younger than she expected, maybe mid-20s, with a gap between his front teeth and an expression like she had just appeared out of thin air. He said, looking between her and the big man against the column. Tank. Tank, she would learn, that was what everyone called him. That Marcus Rodriguez had been Tank since he was 19 years old, unfolded his arms. He walked toward her. She made herself hold her ground, even though every instinct was yelling at her to step back, step back, step back. He stopped about 3 feet away, and then he did the last thing she expected. He looked at her, really looked at her. Not the way the minivan woman had looked at her from a safe distance, not the way the shelter worker had looked at her with distant professional pity. He looked at her the way someone looks at another person when they're actually seeing them. And he said, "Did you eat today?" Emily Carter, who had not cried in 3 weeks, felt something crack open behind her sternum. She stopped, swallowed. "I'm here about the job." "I heard you," he said. His voice was low and even. "I asked if you ate today." She looked at him. She looked at the gap-toothed kid still half under the truck. She looked at the broad-shouldered man at the workbench, who had turned around now and was watching her with quiet eyes. "No," she said, because there was something in his tone that made lying feel pointless. "No, I didn't eat today." Tank nodded once, like she had confirmed something he already knew. He turned to the kid by the truck. "Danny," he said, "go get the sandwiches from the back." "Both of them?" Danny asked. "Both of them," Tank said. He looked back at Emily. "Come sit down. We'll talk about the job after you eat." She sat at a metal folding table in the back corner of the garage that served as what Danny cheerfully called the break room, which was really just a table, 3 mismatched chairs, a mini fridge that hummed too loud, and a coffee maker that looked like it had been purchased secondhand from a fire sale sometime in 2009. Danny set 2 wrapped sandwiches in front of her and poured her a coffee without being asked, and then sat across from her with his elbows on the table like they were old friends catching up. "So where'd you come from?" he asked. Not suspicious, just genuinely curious, the way a kid at summer camp asks where you're from. "North," Emily said. She picked up the first sandwich carefully. It was turkey and cheese. She made herself eat slowly, even though her whole body was vibrating with the need to inhale it. "North, like north, Canada. North, or like an hour away north." Danny, the broad-shouldered man, had appeared in the doorway. He was older than Danny, maybe late 30s, with a salt and pepper beard, and the kind of stillness that comes from a person who has survived enough that they don't feel the need to fill silence anymore. He was looking at Danny with a flat expression. Danny shut up. The man looked at Emily. Don't mind him, he was raised in a barn. I was not raised in a barn, Danny said indignant. I'm Big Jim, the man said to Emily, ignoring Danny entirely. He didn't offer his hand, just nodded like an acknowledgement of her existence. You said you're here about the cleaning job. Yes, Emily said. How old are you? She hesitated half a second. 18. Big Jim looked at her for a long moment with those quiet eyes. He didn't call her out on it, he just nodded again. Tank'll talk to you when you're done eating, he said. He doesn't hire without talking first. He disappeared back into the garage. Danny leaned forward immediately. He's not as scary as he looks, he said in a stage whisper. I heard that. Big Jim's voice came from somewhere in the garage. Danny winced. Emily almost smiled. It was the first time she had almost smiled in weeks, and it felt strange in her face, like a muscle she'd forgotten she had. Tank came and sat across from her when she'd finished both sandwiches and was on her second cup of coffee. He had a clipboard with what looked like a liability form on it, which surprised her. She had expected a lot of things from this man, but not paperwork. He set the clipboard down, but didn't push it toward her yet. What's your name? He asked. Emily Carter. Emily Carter, he repeated. Not mocking, just confirming, like he was filing it somewhere accurate. How old are you, Emily Carter? She looked at him. The lie she'd told Big Jim sat between them. 17, she said. Something shifted in his expression, not judgment, not alarm, more like confirmation of something he'd already calculated. You have family in Millhaven? No. You have family anywhere? The pause before she said no was answer enough on its own. Tank leaned back in his chair. It creaked under his weight. He looked at the table, then at her, and she could see him making some kind of decision behind those dark eyes. The cleaning job pays $40 a day, he said. Cash, 6 days a week. Hours are 8 to 4, but you can leave at 3 on Saturdays. You'd be responsible for the shop floor, the bathroom, the break area, and the front office. That's it. You don't touch any vehicles, any tools, any equipment, unless one of us specifically asks you to hand something. Emily nodded, her heart hammering. The work isn't glamorous, Tank said. It's a garage. It's going to be dirty and loud, and some days it's going to smell like things you don't want to think about. You got a problem with any of that? No, she said immediately. He held her gaze. Where are you staying? She held his gaze back. I'm figuring that out. That was the closest she could come to telling the truth without saying the words, I'm living in a dead car in a parking lot behind the dollar store. She watched his jaw tighten slightly. Not in anger she would come to understand later, but in the way it did when he was processing something he found unacceptable about the world. There's a room above the garage, he said carefully. It's not much, used to be storage. There's a cot and a space heater and a bathroom. We don't use it for anything right now. Emily stared at him. You don't have to. I know I don't have to, Tank said. His voice was firm but not unkind. I'm telling you, it exists. You want to use it while you're working here, you use it. It's part of the job. She looked at him for a long moment. She had been in enough situations where generosity came with a cost buried in the fine print, where people handed you something with one hand and reached into your pocket with the other. Why? She asked. He didn't look offended by the question. He just looked at her steadily and said, because nobody should be out in the cold when there's space available. That's it. She didn't entirely believe it was that simple. A 17-year-old girl who had been through what she'd been through doesn't believe things are simple. But she was cold, and she was tired, and she was out of crackers, and $11.43, and she looked at this enormous, scarred, tattooed man who had asked her if she'd eaten before he asked her name, and she thought, I am going to trust this one time. Just this one time. Okay, she said. Thank you. Tank pushed the clipboard across the table. Fill out what you can. Skip anything you can't answer. You start tomorrow, 7:30. He stood up, and that was that. So, the room above the garage was exactly what he'd said, not much. A cot with a military blanket, a space heater in the corner, a bathroom barely big enough to turn around in, a single window that looked out over the alley behind the building. Emily stood in the center of it for a full minute after Tank showed her up the stairs and left her to it. Then she sat down on the cot, put her face in her hands and cried. Not from sadness, not exactly. It was something more complicated than that, the way your body releases when pressure that's been building for weeks suddenly has somewhere to go. She cried because there was a roof over her head. She cried because someone had given her 2 sandwiches and asked about her before they asked for anything. She cried because the space heater was already running and the room was warm, and she hadn't been warm, genuinely, unguardedly warm in so long, she'd forgotten what it felt like in her chest. She cried until she was empty, and then she lay down on the cot in her clothes, and she slept for 11 hours straight. The first week at Blackstone Garage was its own kind of education. Emily came down at 7:15 the first morning, 15 minutes early, because she had learned a long time ago that showing up exactly on time is the same as showing up late when you have no credit to spend. The garage was already running. Danny was under something, as usual, singing to himself off-key. Big Jim was at the workbench doing something precise with small tools. A third man she hadn't met yet was near the back, and he had the kind of quality to him that made her notice him without being able to say exactly why quiet in a way that was different from Big Jim's quiet. Watchful. Still in a way that felt deliberate. Tank came out of the office, handed her a mop bucket and a list and said, "Start with the bathroom. When that's done, do the front. Work your way back. No pleasantries, no hovering." He handed her the list and walked away, which was somehow the most respectful thing anyone had done for her in recent memory, treating her like someone capable of reading a list and following it without supervision. She started with the bathroom. By noon, she had worked her way through the front office and most of the main floor, and she had formed opinions about all of them the way you form opinions about people when you're watching them without them knowing you're paying attention. Danny, she decided, was 24 years old in body and approximately 14 in spirit, and he was the kind of person who had never learned to be quiet, because being loud was the only way he'd ever gotten anyone to notice him. But underneath the noise, he was kind. She could see it in the way he talked to the vehicles, in the way he handed tools to Big Jim without being asked for them, in the way he'd brought her those sandwiches without making it a production. Big Jim was a man who had made peace with himself at some point, and the peace had made him slow and careful in the way that had nothing to do with weakness. He measured things twice. He spoke once. He didn't waste effort on anything that didn't need it. She overheard him on the phone at one point, talking to what sounded like a daughter, his voice going gentle in a way that changed his whole face. The quiet man was Ghost. She learned his name when Danny said it. "Ghost, hand me the 3/8", and the man reached for the tool without looking up, without a word, and handed it over like he'd been waiting to be asked. Ghost barely spoke, but Emily noticed the way his eyes tracked everything in the garage, the way he always knew where everyone was without seeming to look. He was the kind of person who made you feel safe by being difficult to read. And Tank. Tank was the hardest to figure out, partly because he didn't stay in one place long enough to study. He moved through the garage like the whole space was his to manage, which it was checking on things, making adjustments, running the office phone, occasionally disappearing into the back for stretches that Danny told her unprompted meant he was doing the books. He did 2 years of college, Danny said during her third day while she was sweeping near his workstation. Business management, before he came back here. He grew up here, Emily asked. Born and raised, Danny said. His dad started the garage. Tank inherited it. He lowered his voice conspiratorially, even though no one was within earshot. He's smarter than he looks, which, given how he looks, that's saying something. What happened? Emily asked. Because she was good at reading people, and she knew that Tank, like Big Jim, like Ghost, had a before something that had happened before this garage, this life. Danny's easy expression shifted. That's his story to tell, he said quietly. And that was the first lesson of Blackstone Garage. Everybody's story was their own to tell. Nobody volunteered more than they wanted to, and nobody pushed for more than was offered. It was, Emily would think later, the most functional social system she had ever lived inside. The mechanical thing happened on day 9. She was sweeping near the Chevy half-ton they'd been working on all week, a classic restoration for some client mid-process engine, partially disassembled and spread across a workbench in what looked like chaos, but what she'd learned actually organized by some logic she was beginning to understand. Danny was underneath on the dolly again, muttering something frustrated. Big Jim had stepped out to take a call. Danny rolled out, sat up, and ran both hands through his hair with an expression of someone facing a problem they had already spent too long on. What's wrong? Emily asked. She didn't mean to say it. It came out before she decided to ask. Danny looked at her, then at the engine on the bench, then back at her. Timing chain's giving me grief, he said. This particular model, the tensioner's weird, and I can't. He made a gesture that was half frustration, half defeat. Emily looked at the engine components on the bench. She had never worked on a car in her life, but she had spent 3 weeks living in one, and before that she had spent years in foster homes where sometimes the only thing to do was read whatever was lying around, and what was often lying around were old car manuals, because foster families tended to hoard the strangest things, and Emily had always been the kind of person who read whatever was in front of her, whether she thought it would be useful or not. She set down the broom. Bisamos by broom. She walked to the bench. She looked at the laid-out components the way she'd looked at the sign in the window 9 days ago. Like a puzzle that had an answer if you could just find the right angle. Your tensioner bolt, she said. She pointed. If it's the original hardware, it's supposed to be torqued to... She stopped herself. She looked at Danny sideways. Sorry, I shouldn't... No, Danny said, sitting very still. Keep going. 21 foot-pounds, she said. But the guides on this series, they're plastic, and if they've degraded at all, you lose tension variability. I'm probably wrong. Danny stared at her, then he looked at the engine, then he looked at her again. Where did you learn that? Emily picked up her broom. I read a lot. From the doorway of the office, Tank's voice came quiet and even. She's right about the tension spec. Both of them looked up. Tank was leaning in the doorway, coffee in hand, watching with that unreadable expression. Check the guides, Danny. And he said, Danny checked the guides. The guides were degraded. It took him an extra hour to source the right replacement and 45 minutes to fit them. But when that engine turned over, when it caught and ran smooth and true, Danny let out a whoop that echoed off the garage ceiling. He pointed at Emily, who was sweeping the far corner and pretending she hadn't been listening. You, he said, you're not just a cleaner. I'm the cleaner, Emily said, but she was smiling. For the second time in Mill Haven, something in her face remembered how. Tank found her alone in the break room that evening after Danny and Big Jim and Ghost had headed out, writing in a small notebook she kept in her jacket pocket, not a diary, just a habit, words and diagrams and half-formed thoughts she'd carried for years. You've worked on engines before, he said. It wasn't a question. No, she said. I've read about them. There's a difference between reading and knowing, he said. You knew. She set down the pen. She looked at him. Is that a problem? No, he said. He sat down across from her. He rested his hands on the table, big scarred hands that built and fixed things. I want to ask you something, and I want you to tell me the truth if you can. She waited. How long have you been on your own? The question landed between them like something fragile. Since August, she said. His expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. Foster care, he said. She nodded once. He was quiet for a moment. Then, I'm not going to pretend I know what that was like, but I want you to know something. Whatever you were before you walked in here, that's yours. I'm not going to pry at it. But while you're here, while you're working here, he paused. This garage takes care of its people. That's the one rule I don't bend on. Emily looked at him. She was 17 years old and she had heard versions of that promise before from social workers and foster parents and teachers who had meant it right up until the moment it became inconvenient. She nodded. She said, okay. And this time, for a reason she couldn't have explained out loud, she believed it. It was on day 14 that she understood what Blackstone Garage really was. She had been watching long enough to see the patterns. The rotation of men who came through, not customers, not exactly men who came in the evenings and sat in the break room and drank coffee and talked in low voices. Young men mostly with that particular combination of wariness and directionlessness she recognized from her own face in mirrors. Ghosts seemed to run these conversations. Big Jim made the coffee. Danny cracked jokes at exactly the right moments to cut tension without dismissing it. She asked Danny about it on day 12, and Danny had gone quiet in an uncharacteristic way, and then said, Tank started it about 4 years ago after some things. We call it the shop. It's just a place for guys who don't have anywhere else to go, to figure things out. Is it a program? Not officially, no paperwork, no funding, no government, anything. He said the last word like it tasted bad. Just people, just the garage. Emily filed that away. On day 14, she was mopping near the break room when one of the evening visitors, a kid who couldn't have been more than 19 with a swollen eye and a jaw that he kept clenching like something hurt, started crying. Not loudly, just quietly the way people cry when they've been holding it so long it seeps out without permission. Nobody made a production of it. Ghost sat with him. Big Jim poured him coffee. Tank came out of the office and sat at the end of the table without saying anything. Just present, just there, a physical fact in the room that said, "You are not alone in this space." Emily mopped further down the hall and gave them privacy. But she stood there for a moment with the mop in her hands, and she thought, the whole town told me this place was dangerous. Not one of them told me it was this. She had been at Blackstone for 18 days when she woke up at 2 in the morning to a sound. She couldn't immediately identify a rhythmic metallic sound, small and patient, coming from the garage below. She lay on her cot and listened. Then she got up. She came down the stairs in her socks and pushed open the connecting door to find Tank alone in the garage working at the workbench under a single light. He was working on something small, a carburetor, she realized, taking it apart piece by piece with a focus that was almost meditative. He heard her. He glanced up. She said, "You can't sleep either." "I sleep fine," he said, "just sometimes better with something in my hands." She crossed the garage and sat on an overturned bucket near the bench. She watched him work. He didn't tell her to go back to bed. After a while, she said, "What happened to your dad?" He continued working. "Heart attack. 11 years ago, I was 23. "And you came back here?" "Had to," he said simply. This place was his. Couldn't let someone else have it. "That's not the only reason," she said. He looked up at her, then something sharp and evaluating in his gaze. She held it. She was 17 and she had nothing left to lose, and she had gotten very good at looking people in the eye. "No," he said after a moment. "Not the only reason." He looked back down at the carburetor. "I did things before I came back here that I'm not proud of," he said. His voice was even factual, like he was reporting on someone else. "I was angry for a long time. Made bad choices about who I was angry at and how I showed it." He turned a small part over in his hands. "This garage was the thing that pulled me back. I figure if it pulled me back, it can do the same for other people." Emily thought about the kid with the swollen eye and the seeping out tears. "It does," she said. He looked at her sideways. Something in his face shifted, not quite a smile, something quieter than that. "Yeah," he said, "it does." They sat in the light in the quiet while he put the carburetor back together, piece by piece, each part exactly where it belonged. Emily watched his hands and thought that this was what she had never been in her life, exactly where she belonged. And then before she could get comfortable in the feeling, before she could let herself settle into it, the way you settle into warm water, a knock at the garage's side door. Hard, urgent, 3 sharp raps. Tank was on his feet before the third one landed. The easy quiet of 30 seconds ago gone completely replaced by something different in his posture, alert, contained, ready in a way that was obviously not new. He crossed to the side door and opened it. 3 of Ghost's contacts stood in the alley. Emily had seen 2 of them before peripherally, the third she hadn't. The third had blood on his jacket and an expression that made her stomach drop before he said a single word. "Someone's been asking around town about the girl," he said. Tank's jaw went tight. He didn't look at Emily. He kept his eyes on the man in the doorway. "Who?" he said. Not a question, an instruction. "Don't know yet. But whoever it is, they've been talking to the cops." The air in the garage changed. Emily sat very still on her overturned bucket and felt the warmth of 2 minutes ago drain out of the room like water from a tub, and she thought it was too good. It was always going to be too good. And then she thought underneath that quieter and fiercer, "But I am not running. Not this time." To be continued in part 2. Tank didn't move from the doorway for a long moment. He stood with one hand on the frame and let the words settle. "Someone's been asking around town about the girl." And Emily watched the back of his neck and knew the way she always knew that what came next would determine everything. "Come inside," Tank said. The man with blood on his jacket, Ray, she would learn, stepped in, and Tank closed the side door behind him and locked it. 2 locks. Emily noticed that. She noticed everything now. "Oh," Tank said. Ray pulled off his jacket and set it on the workbench. The blood wasn't his, or at least he moved like it wasn't. "Started this afternoon. Guy going door to door on the south side asking if anyone had seen a teenage girl, blonde, driving a beat-up Honda. Described her pretty exactly. He glanced at Emily. Not unkindly, just factually. Described where the car broke down the parking lot, everything. Emily's chest went cold. Who is he? Tank said. Said he was family. Showed people a photo. Did anyone give him anything? Ray's jaw shifted. Mrs. Paulson at the hardware store. She mentioned the garage. The silence that followed had edges. Danny appeared at the top of the stairs in a t-shirt and sweatpants, hair everywhere, half asleep, until he saw Ray and went very awake very fast. What happened? Go get Ghost, Tank said. Danny went. Tank turned to Emily. He didn't ask her if she was okay. He didn't perform concern. He just looked at her with those steady dark eyes and asked the question that actually mattered. Is there someone from your past who would hire someone to find you? Emily's stomach turned over. His name is Derek Paulson, she said. Linda's boyfriend, my last foster placement. Tank waited. He's not family, she said. He told the state he was. He's not. She watched Tank's expression, and she saw the moment he understood what she wasn't saying. The thing she'd never said out loud to anyone because saying it out loud made it real, and she had been trying for 4 months to keep it from being real. She watched his jaw tighten in that way she'd come to read as the external signal of something internal going very, very controlled. Okay, he said, quiet, absolute. He's not coming near this garage. You don't know what he's capable of. Emily. His voice was even, and it stopped her. Neither does he. Ghost materialized. She still hadn't figured out how. He did, that appeared from wherever he'd been. Like a signal had been broadcast at a frequency only he received. Big Jim was right behind him, which meant Big Jim had been somewhere nearby already, which meant on some level these men were always available to each other at 2 a.m, which told her something she filed away for later. Tank laid it out in under 2 minutes. No drama, no editorializing, just facts. When he finished, Ghost looked at Emily once, then looked at Tank. I'll find out who he is by morning, Ghost said. I need more than who he is, Tank said. Ghost nodded. By morning, he said again, and walked back out the side door into the dark without another word. Big Jim poured coffee. He set a mug in front of Emily without asking. You should try to sleep, he said. You're joking, Emily said. Big Jim almost smiled. Yeah, he said, I know. She didn't sleep. She sat at the break room table with her coffee, and Big Jim sat across from her, and Tank disappeared into the office, and Danny sat beside her playing a game on his phone with the sound off, which was, she realized, his way of saying, I am staying here with you without making you talk about it. It was one of the kindest things anyone had ever done for her, and it came wrapped in such complete casualness that she could accept it without feeling like a charity case. At 4:17 in the morning, Ghost came back. He came in through the side door, sat down at the table, and opened his phone. He turned it face up so Tank, who had come out of the office when he heard the door, could see the screen. Derek Allen Paulson, Ghost said. 41. 2 priors, 1 for fraud, 1 for assault, both pled down to nothing. Lost his CDL 3 years ago, has been receiving foster care support payments for 3 placements over 6 years. He paused. Current placement closed in August when Emily aged out. Payments stopped. He needs something, Tank said. There's an outstanding debt, Ghost said. $48,000. Personal loan. Lender is not a bank. Emily stared at the table. The numbers connected in her head in a way that made her feel sick. $48,000. Linda's boyfriend. Payments stopped in August. She thought about the way Derek had looked at her sometimes across the kitchen table at Linda's house, calculating like she was a number on a spreadsheet and he was trying to work out the math. He's not trying to find me because he misses me, Emily said. No, Ghost said. He needs to file something, claim something. She pressed her hand flat on the table. There's a settlement from an accident when I was 12. It's in a trust. I can't access it until I'm 18. The room was very quiet. But a legal guardian could petition to access it early, Tank said slowly. If they could prove I was a dependent in their care, Emily said. If they could prove I'd never left voluntarily. She looked up. If they could claim I'd run away, which I did, technically. Danny said very quietly, that son of a... Danny, Big Jim said, I'm just saying, I know what you're saying. Big Jim looked at Emily. How much is in the trust? I don't know exactly. My caseworker told me once it was enough to matter. She swallowed. She said I should protect it. Tank stood up. He looked at Ghost. Can he file anything while she's legally in the county? Depends on how he does it, Ghost said. If he gets a lawyer to file an emergency petition claiming she's a missing minor in his care, then we need a lawyer first, Tank said. It's 4 a.m, Danny said. I know what time it is, Tank said. He looked at Emily. Do you trust me? The question landed with all of its weight. She had been in this garage 19 days. She had known this man for 19 days. She thought about Linda's house. She thought about the shelter that needed documentation. She thought about the parking lot. Yes, she said, then go upstairs and try to rest. I'm going to make some calls when it's a reasonable hour. Nothing is happening to you while you're in this building. That is a fact. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she stood up and picked up her coffee mug. Tank, she said. He looked at her. Thank you, she said. It wasn't enough. She knew it wasn't enough. But he nodded like it was exactly sufficient, and she went back upstairs and lay on her cot and stared at the ceiling until the sun came up. She did not feel safe, but she felt less alone than she had felt in as long as she could remember. And in the arithmetic of her life that was a significant number. She did not sleep. But somewhere around 6 a.m, staring at that ceiling, a thought arrived that surprised her with its clarity. I am not running this time. She had run from Linda's the moment she understood what Derek was. She had run from the shelter. She had run from the church on Maple with the kind-eyed woman and the unavailable beds. Every time the ground shifted, she had picked up and run because running was the only strategy that had ever reliably worked. But she was not going to run from Blackstone Garage. She wasn't entirely sure when she had decided that. But lying in there in the early morning with the sound of the garage starting up below her, Danny's off key, singing the coffee maker's loud hum, the low rumble of Tank on the office phone, she knew it. Like she knew the tension spec on that Chevy's timing chain. She just knew. She got up, washed her face, and went downstairs. By 8 o'clock, the garage was running as if nothing had happened, which was its own form of statement. Danny was under a vehicle. Big Jim was at the bench. Ghost had vanished again. Tank was in the office with the door half closed on a second call of the morning, his voice too low to make out words, but steady enough that the tone was clear, controlled, deliberate, building something. Emily picked up her mop and started on the front. At 9:15, Tank came out of the office and said, I have a lawyer coming at 11. Her name is Patricia Wells. She handles family law. She's good. She'll talk to you first, just you in the office. I'll step out. Emily stopped mopping. You're paying for a lawyer. I'm calling in a favor, Tank said. Don't make it into something it's not. It's a big favor. I've done bigger ones for her, he said simply. Are you going to let her help you or not? Yes, Emily said. Obviously, yes. Good, he said. He started to walk back toward the office, then stopped. He turned back halfway. Emily, he doesn't know for certain you're here. He has a lead, not a confirmation. You haven't done anything wrong. I want you to remember that before you go into that meeting. She looked at him. He's going to say I ran away. Technically you did, Tank said, but there's a lot of space between running away and what he's going to try to claim. He paused. Patricia will explain the difference, and then she's going to help you document the truth. He went back in the office. Emily stood with her mop and breathed one breath at a time like she'd learned to do in the harder moments. Just the next breath. Just the next moment. Don't let the whole weight fall on you at once. You okay? Danny's voice came from under the vehicle he was working on. I'm fine, Emily said, a pause. Then from under the car, you're allowed to not be fine, you know. We're not going to think less of you. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then I know. She didn't know, actually, not yet, but she was beginning to. Patricia Wells arrived at 10:55, 5 minutes early, which told Emily something. She was a black woman in her late 40s with natural hair and reading glasses pushed up on her head, and the kind of presence that said, I have been the most competent person in every room I've ever entered, and I am tired of having to prove it. She came in through the front, shook Tank's hand, looked at Emily once with an expression that was professionally neutral and privately sharp, and said, Is there somewhere we can talk? They sat in the office, just the two of them, for 40 minutes. Patricia asked questions the way a surgeon cuts precise, purposeful, nothing wasted. She did not react to anything Emily told her, which was more comforting than any amount of visible sympathy would have been, because it communicated that nothing Emily said was beyond her capacity to handle. When Emily was finished talking, Patricia made several notes, removed her reading glasses from her head, and put them on properly and looked at Emily over the frames. Okay, she said, here's where you stand. You were a legal minor in foster care who left a placement without authorization. That is technically a status violation, not a crime. More importantly, Derek Paulson was never your legal guardian. Linda Maurer was. He has no standing to file as a guardian. However, she lifted one finger. If he files a missing persons report in your name and law enforcement finds you before we can establish your current situation, it creates complications. What kind of complications? The kind that take time to untangle. And time is what he's counting on. The longer this sits unresolved, the closer you get to turning 18 and the closer you get to being able to access that trust yourself and making his claim completely moot. Emily frowned. So he needs to move fast. Very fast, Patricia said, which means we need to move faster. She closed her notepad. I'm going to file an independent status petition on your behalf today. It'll establish you as a non-dependent minor with legal capacity to make decisions about your own residence. It won't be bulletproof immediately, but it creates a paper trail that counters anything he tries to file. She looked at Emily steadily. I'm also going to need your caseworker's name and last known contact information, the name of your original social worker, and any documentation you have related to the trust. I have almost nothing, Emily said. He went through my things before I left. Patricia's expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes went very hard. He went through your personal belongings. Everything I had in that house, Emily said. All my documents, my birth certificate, the trust paperwork. He said he was holding them for safekeeping. Patricia was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. Then she said, that's document retention. That's potentially criminal. She picked up her pen again. Emily, I'm going to ask you something and I need you to think carefully before you answer. Is there anything Derek Paulson did to you that you haven't told me? Anything at all? The office was very quiet. Outside the closed door, the garage went on the sounds of work, of men doing purposeful things, of engines being brought back to life. Emily thought about Linda's house. She thought about what it had felt like to understand slowly and then all at once what Derek was. She thought about the night she'd taken her jacket and her notebook and the $11.43 she'd saved and walked out into the November dark. He didn't hurt me, she said carefully. He made sure I understood what he was capable of. That's different. Patricia held her gaze for a moment. Yes, she said, it is. She stood up. I'm going to need you to write down everything you just told me as specifically as you can remember it. Dates times things he said. Can you do that today? Yes, Emily said. Good. Patricia moved toward the door, then paused with her hand on the frame. She looked back at Emily, and for just a moment, the professional shell shifted slightly, showing something underneath that was more personal. I've known Marcus Rodriguez for a long time, she said. He doesn't ask for favors for people he doesn't believe in, just so you know. She opened the door and walked back into the garage, and Emily sat alone in Tank's office for a moment, looking at the walls covered in invoices and schedules, and a small frame photo she hadn't noticed before. Tank younger, standing next to an older man with the same jaw and darker eyes, both of them looking at the camera with identical expressions of unsmiling pride. She looked at that photo for a long time. Then she picked up the pen Patricia had left on the desk, found a blank piece of paper, and started writing. She wrote for 2 hours. She wrote everything. Every date she could pin down, every specific word she could remember. Every small, deliberate thing Derek had done to make sure she understood her position in that house. Not daughter, not ward, not even a person, really, just an asset with a timeline attached. She wrote it in the same flat, factual voice she used when she talked to herself in her head, the one that had learned to report events without drowning in them. And by the time she was done, her hand ached, and there were 9 pages of small, careful handwriting on the desk. She went and found Patricia, who was drinking coffee with Tank near the front of the garage and speaking in the shorthand of 2 people who had known each other through enough difficult things to not need full sentences. Emily handed Patricia the pages. Patricia flipped through them, her expression professionally neutral, her reading glasses on. She reached the last page. She looked up. This is thorough, she said. I have a good memory, Emily said. I can see that. Patricia tucked the pages into her bag. I'll be in touch by end of day. She looked at Tank. Keep her here and keep her visible to the people in this building. Don't let her be alone out on their property until I get the petition filed. Not planning on it, Tank said. Patricia left. Tank turned to Emily. He studied her face in the way he had not invasive, just honest, the way you check something for structural integrity. You okay? He asked. Same question Danny had asked from under the car. Different weight. I will be, Emily said. She believed it more than she had this morning. He nodded. Good. He picked up his own coffee. You want to actually do some work today, or do you need a break? It was so perfectly, deliberately ordinary that she almost laughed. I want to work, she said. The Harley in the back needs cleaning before we can assess the carb situation. You know where the solvent cloths are? I know where they are, she said. She went to find the solvent cloths. It was 3:30 in the afternoon when Danny, completely unprompted, set a wrench in her hand. She had been watching him work on the Harley assessment for 20 minutes. Not meaning to watch, just finding herself watching the way she always found herself watching when something mechanical was being figured out. The problem was in the fuel delivery. She could see it in the way Danny was approaching. It could see what he was circling without landing on yet. He set the wrench in her hand and stepped back. I'm not a mechanic, she said. I know, Danny said. What do you think the problem is? She looked at the Harley. She looked at the components Danny had exposed. She looked at the position of the petcock in the wheels and the bowl on the carb, and she said slowly, your needle valve, it's not seating properly. The float level's off. It's going to run rich and eventually flood. Danny looked at Tank, who had appeared at some point and was leaning against the support column with his arms crossed, watching. She's right again, Tank said. She's always right, Danny said. He didn't sound annoyed. He sounded like a person discovering that a situation they thought they understood is actually more interesting than they realized. I'm reading patterns, Emily said. I don't actually know how to fix it. I just see what's wrong. That's diagnostics, Tank said. That's half the job. He looked at her steadily. You want to learn the other half? She looked at the Harley. She looked at the wrench still in her hand. Danny, Tank said, show her how to reset the float. Danny grinned his gap-toothed grin. Yes, sir, he said with completely unironic enthusiasm, and pulled up a stool beside the Harley and started talking, and Emily stood next to him with the wrench and listened with her whole body the way she'd only ever listened to things that mattered. Somewhere around the third step of Danny's explanation, Ghost appeared in her peripheral vision and stood watching without commenting, which she had learned was Ghost's version of paying a compliment. At 5:47, Patricia called Tank's cell. Emily was wiping down a tool cart when she saw his expression change, not dramatically, just a shift in the set of his shoulders that told her the call was not neutral. She watched him walk to the far end of the garage, turning slightly away, listening. She watched Danny notice her watching and stop pretending he wasn't listening too. Tank came back. The petition's filed, he said. Patricia got it in before close of business. But Emily heard the but before he said it. Derek Paulson filed a missing persons report this afternoon, before she could get the petition through. His jaw was tight. There's going to be a welfare check. Probably tomorrow morning. The garage went quiet. Even the ambient sound seemed to hold for a second. What does that mean? Danny asked. It means a social worker and possibly an officer come to verify Emily's situation, Tank said. He looked at Emily. It's not an arrest, it's a check. Patricia says our position is solid. The petition establishes you as an independent minor. The job gives you demonstrated income and stable residence, and the garage provides documentation of employment. He paused. But you're going to have to talk to them. Emily nodded. She felt the fear move through her the way cold water moves all at once and then through. Okay, she said. Patricia will be here, Tank said. You won't be alone in that room. Okay, she said again. Big Jim put a hand on her shoulder, brief, careful, the kind of contact that asks permission while it gives it. You've done harder things than talk to a social worker, he said quietly. She knew she had. She thought about November nights in a parking lot and crackers rationed across 2 days and the weight of a world that had looked at her and decided she didn't need anything from it. She thought about Tank's voice at 2 a.m. This garage takes care of its people. I know, she said. But that night, after Danny and Big Jim and Ghost had gone, after Tank had finally turned off the lights in the office and gone up to whatever space he occupied above the back half of the building, Emily sat on her cot and opened her notebook and wrote one line in the center of an empty page. I am not what happened to me. She had read that somewhere once in one of the random books in one of the random homes, and it had meant nothing to her, then felt like something stitched on a decorative pillow by someone who had never actually been tested by what happened to them. It meant something different now, not because her situation had improved, not because the welfare check wasn't coming in the morning, or because Derek Paulson had given up, or because the fear in her chest was gone. It meant something because she was still here, because she had walked into this garage with $11 and change and a body shaped entirely by survival instinct, and something in her had looked at this strange broken place full of scarred men and said, here, not safe, not solved, not finished, but here. She closed the notebook. She turned off the lamp. She lay in the dark and listened to the sounds of Millhaven settling around her distant traffic wind, at the window the deep structural silence of the garage below. And she thought very specifically about the float level on a carburetor, about the way a small component improperly seated creates a cascade of problems that look like something else entirely until you trace them back to the source. You find the source, Danny had said. You fix the source. Everything downstream corrects. She was still thinking about that when she finally slept. She did not know, lying there in the dark, that in the morning the world was going to try very hard to take all of this away from her. She did not know that the welfare check was going to arrive with company she hadn't anticipated. A face she recognized, a presence from before that would split this fragile new ground right down the middle. She did not know any of that yet. What she knew in her last conscious moment before sleep took her was that she had a wrench in her hand and someone who had shown her how to use it. For the first time in a very long time, that felt like enough. The morning after Tank came home from the hospital, the garage did not open. That had never happened before. Not once in the 4 months Emily had been at Blackstone. The garage opened at 7:30 every single morning, including the Saturday Tank had 102 fever, and Danny had to physically block the door to keep him from going downstairs. The garage opening was as reliable as sunrise, and its not opening hit Emily in the stomach like a cold fist when she came downstairs at 7:15 and found the roll-up doors still down and Ghost standing at the front window with a coffee mug and an expression she had never seen on him before. "How bad?" she asked. Ghost turned from the window. 3 broken ribs, concussion. They hit him from behind. His voice was absolutely level in the way that meant something underneath it was not level at all. He refused to stay overnight. "Of course he did," Danny said from the break room doorway. His voice had none of its usual color. He looked like someone had turned a dial in him down to almost nothing. Big Jim was at the table with both hands wrapped around a mug, not drinking from it, just holding it. "He's upstairs," he said to Emily. "He asked for you." She went upstairs. Tank was sitting on the edge of his cot. She had never been in his space before, and she registered it peripherally without dwelling on it, just a room like hers, but larger with more books, and a drafting table against one wall covered in what looked like garage schematics. He was sitting carefully the way people sit when a wrong movement costs them. His left eye was swollen to a slit. There was a line of stitches along his jaw that tracked the path of something hard and deliberate. He looked at her when she came in. His one good eye was clear and completely alert. "Sit down," he said. She sat in the chair by the drafting table. She looked at him and made herself look at all of it, the swelling, the stitches, the way he held his ribs when he breathed, because looking away felt like a betrayal of something. "I'm okay," he said. "I know you are," she said. "That's not what I was thinking." "What were you thinking?" "That this is my fault," she said. He said nothing for a moment. Outside, a car passed on the street below, and she could hear the garage sounds quiet, subdued, the men moving around each other in that particular silence that meant everyone was thinking the same thing, and nobody was ready to say it. "No," Tank said. "This is Vargas's fault, and it's going to be dealt with. They told you to get rid of me." "They told me a lot of things," he said. He shifted slightly and held his ribs again with one arm, involuntary, and she saw him register the involuntary movement and decide not to be frustrated by it. "They've been trying to push this garage out for 2 years. You were the excuse this time. It wasn't going to stay an excuse forever. But the timing..." "Emily," his voice was firm enough to stop her. "Listen to me. I have had this garage for 11 years. I have built something here. I am not losing it because 3 men with crowbars thought they could scare me into folding. He looked at her steadily with his one clear eye. And I'm not losing the best diagnostic mind I've found in 11 years of running this shop because she thinks she owes the world an apology for existing in it. She sat very still. Patricia called this morning, he said. The civil case they filed against the garage, she's found something. She's coming at noon. I need you at that table. I'll be there, Emily said. Good. He started to push himself to standing, and she was up before she thought about it. One hand out, and he looked at the offered hand and then at her and took it without comment, using it as a brace without making it into anything. He stood. He let go. Thank you, he said, simply. You fed me sandwiches before you knew my name, she said. We're not close to even. Something happened at the corner of his damaged mouth that was almost a smile. Go downstairs, he said. Tell Danny to open the doors. She went downstairs and told Danny to open the doors, and Danny looked at her with something that was equal parts relief and residual fear. And he went and opened the doors, and Blackstone Garage opened for business 1 hour late on a Tuesday morning, with its owner held together by medical tape and stubbornness, and if the street outside noticed anything different, it kept the observation to itself. Patricia arrived at 11:45, not noon, because Patricia Wells was constitutionally incapable of being late to something that mattered. She came in with a younger man Emily hadn't met carrying a laptop bag and 2 accordion files in an expression that was the sharpest Emily had seen on her face, which was saying something because Patricia's baseline expression could cut glass. She set everything on the break room table. She looked at Tank, cataloged his injuries with one quick professional sweep, made no comment on them, and opened the first accordion file. Vargas Automotive filed their civil complaint 4 days ago, she said, claiming Blackstone Garage engaged in predatory business practices, specifically poaching their clients and engaging in price manipulation in a shared service territory. She paused. It's nonsense. We all know it's nonsense. But nonsense with a lawyer attached to it can do significant damage while we're busy proving it's nonsense, which is exactly what they're counting on. She looked around the table. Tank, Emily, Ghost, Big Jim, Danny. What they did not count on is that nonsense leaves tracks. She opened the laptop and turned it toward them. My associate, Marcus. She nodded at the younger man, who nodded back. Spent the last 72 hours going through every public filing, every court record, every business registration connected to Vargas Automotive and its parent LLC. She let that sit for a second. Vargas Automotive is a shell. Danny blinked. A what? The garage is real, Patricia said. The business is operating, but the entity that filed this lawsuit against you is a subsidiary of a holding company registered in Delaware with a registered agent that doesn't answer phones and an address that's a UPS store. She clicked something on the laptop. That holding company has been named in 3 previous civil actions in 2 other states. 2 settled out of court. 1 went to judgment. The plaintiff won the LLC, dissolved overnight, and the principals opened a new entity the following week. Ghost leaned forward slightly. For Ghost, that was the equivalent of jumping to his feet. They've done this before, he said. This is what they do, Patricia said. They move into a market, they identify an established business, they create legal pressure, civil suits code, complaints, rumor campaigns, and they keep the pressure on until the target either folds or spends enough on legal defense that it becomes financially unviable. She looked at Tank. They picked you because you're independent. No corporate backing, no franchise umbrella, no deep pocket parent company to absorb a protracted legal fight. What they're also doing criminally, Marcus said, leaning in, well, it's not subtle. The assault on Mr. Rodriguez, Tank's jaw tightened at the formal phrasing, but he didn't interrupt, follows a pattern. 2 of the other targets reported vandalism and intimidation before their cases settled. 1 reported an assault on a staff member. He paused. They got sloppy this time. 1 of the men involved in last night's incident has a prior connection to a Vargas employee. We found the link through social media, which they apparently didn't think to clean up. The room was very quiet. Emily was watching Tank's face. She was watching him process this, the shape of it, the fact that this was larger than 1 garage in 1 town, that Blackstone had been selected the way a predator selects prey, which meant the attack on him last night wasn't personal in the way she had been carrying it. It was business. It was a machine doing what machines do. She saw the moment that understanding shifted something in him from reactive to strategic. What do we need, Tank said, to take this to a prosecutor? Patricia looked at him with something close to satisfaction. That's exactly the right question, she said. Here's what we need. What they needed was documentation, linkage between the holding company and the prior actions, testimony from at least one of the previous targets, physical evidence connecting the men who assaulted Tank to Vargas's organization, and a prosecutor willing to look at an assault on a biker garage owner as something worth pursuing, which Patricia said flatly was going to be the hardest part. Because of who we are, Big Jim said. Not bitter, just accurate. Because of the optics, Patricia said, matching his tone. Which is why Emily is important. Everyone looked at Emily. She had known this was coming. She had felt it building since Patricia said, and Emily is important, had felt the sentence arriving before it arrived the way she felt mechanical problems before she could name them. The civil suit names the garage, Patricia said, but the rumor campaign that preceded it, the accusations they've been spreading around town, the things that brought police attention to this location, those center significantly on Emily's presence here. An underage girl in a biker garage, which they have been characterizing in the most inflammatory terms available to them. Her eyes were on Emily, direct and clear. If Emily is willing to make a statement about Derek Paulson, about the coordinated nature of the pressure on this garage, about what she witnessed and experienced, it establishes a pattern that connects the personal harassment to the business attack. They used Derek, Emily said. We believe Paulson was approached, Marcus said carefully. Someone fed him information about your whereabouts and encouraged the missing persons report. It created noise around the garage at exactly the right time. He looked at his laptop. Paulson's debt is held by an entity we're still tracing, but the early indicators are suggestive. Emily sat with Fu for a moment. Derek Paulson had always been looking for leverage, and someone had handed him a plan and a phone number and pointed him at Millhaven, and he had walked into it because it cost him nothing to try, and the potential return was the trust she'd been protecting since she was 12 years old. She thought about the 9 pages she'd written in Tank's office. She thought about Patricia's expression reading the last page. I'll make a statement, Emily said. I'll testify if it comes to that. Emily, Tank started. I'm not asking permission, she said. Her voice came out steady. She looked at Tank and she saw him register that and recalibrate. You told me this garage takes care of its people. I'm one of its people. This is how I take care back. The table was quiet. Ghost said very quietly, good. Big Jim put his hand on the table near hers, not touching, just near. Danny was looking at her with an expression so open it was almost hard to look at directly. Tank looked at her for a long moment, then he looked at Patricia. What's the timeline? I can have a meeting with the DA's office by end of week, Patricia said. Emily's statement, combined with what Marcus has pulled, combined with the assault charge, if we land this right, we're not just defending a civil suit, we're making a criminal referral. And the civil suit, Big Jim asked. We file a motion to dismiss based on the fraudulent corporate structure and request expedited discovery. If the LLC is what we think it is, it won't survive a subpoena. She closed the accordion file. But I want to be clear about something. This is going to get louder before it gets quieter. When we push back this hard, people like this push harder. You need to be prepared for that. She looked at Tank when she said it. Tank looked back at her with the expression of a man who has been prepared for things his entire life and is tired of being told to prepare. We'll be ready, he said. Patricia and Marcus left at 1:30, and for a few minutes the break room held all 5 of them in the particular silence that follows a meeting where decisions have been made that cannot be unmade. Then Danny said, does anyone else feel like this is a movie? Because I feel like this is a movie. Danny, Big Jim said, I'm serious. We have a fraudulent LLC, a connected assault, a trust fund angle, and Emily is going to testify in court. That is a movie. It's not a movie, Ghost said. It's a little bit a movie, Danny said. Tank made a sound that was the closest thing to a laugh Emily had heard from him since the hospital, and it clearly cost him something in the ribs because he put his hand against his side and grimaced. But the sound had happened, and the room temperature shifted with it fractionally enough. Go open the back bay, Tank said to Danny. The Silverado's owner is picking up at 3. On it, Danny said and was gone. Big Jim stood up. He looked at Emily with those quiet eyes. You didn't have to do that, he said. Yes, I did, she said. He considered that, nodded once, went back to his bench. Ghost was the last to leave the table. He stood up and he looked at Emily, And he said, which was notable because Ghost assembled sentences the way other people assembled complex mechanisms deliberately only when necessary. You belong here. Then he walked away before she could respond, which was also very Ghost. Emily sat alone at the table for a few minutes. She could hear the garage working around her, the sounds she had come to know so completely in 4 months that she could identify each source without looking. Danny at the back bay, Big Jim's precise tool sounds, the Silverado's engine turning over, Tank's footsteps crossing the floor above her, slow and careful managing the ribs. She opened her notebook. She wrote, "They built something here. I'm not going to let someone take it." She closed the notebook. She went back to work. The next 3 days were the hardest and the strangest. Hard because the pressure Patricia had predicted materialized with speed and precision. 2 more code complaints filed against the garage. A social media campaign that appeared overnight and accused Blackstone of everything from operating without proper licensing to being a front for criminal activity, and a second visit from an officer Emily hadn't seen before, friendly and casual, in a way that was not quite either. Tank handled the officer. Patricia handled the code complaints, both dismissed within 24 hours, filed on technicalities that didn't hold up, clearly designed to generate paperwork rather than actually succeed. Ghost handled the social media with a counter-campaign so quietly effective that Emily only found out about it afterward when Danny mentioned it in the same tone he used to describe a particularly elegant engine solution. Strange, because in the middle of all of it, the garage kept running. The garage kept running because that was what the garage did, and because Tank had made it clear with his bruised body and his taped ribs that closing the doors again was not a vocabulary he had available to him. Customers came, vehicles were fixed, Danny sang off-key under cars. Big Jim made coffee and measured things twice and spoke precisely when he spoke. And Emily worked. She diagnosed a fuel injection problem on a Ford F-15. Oh, that had been stumping Danny for 2 days and turned out to be a failing mass airflow sensor. She rebuilt a carburetor, her first solo rebuild, Danny supervising, but not touching his hands in his pockets, the entire time his expression radiating a very particular kind of pride that he managed not to make embarrassing. She fielded her first customer question, a woman in her 60s who came in for an oil change and mentioned that her car was making a noise, and Emily listened to the description and said, "Sounds like your heat shield's loose on the exhaust," and was correct, and the woman looked at her with genuine surprise and then said, "Good for you, honey," in a way that landed somewhere it wasn't expected to land, and stayed there. On the evening of the 3rd day, Patricia called. Emily was alone in the garage, everyone else had gone. Tank included the first night he'd gone up to his own space before midnight since the hospital, when her phone rang and Patricia's name came up on the screen. She answered. "We have a meeting with Assistant D.A. Reeves tomorrow morning," Patricia said. 9 o'clock, I need you there. Emily's heart picked up its pace. "Okay. Bring the notebook. The 9 pages you wrote in Marcus's office." A pause. "And Emily, I need you to be prepared for the possibility that Reeves doesn't bite immediately. DAs are political animals. He's going to look at this and see a biker garage and a runaway minor, and he's going to need a reason to override that default reading." "What's the reason?" "You," Patricia said. "You're the reason. If you walk in there and you are exactly who you've been since you walked into that garage 4 months ago, clear, specific, unafraid of your own history, then he will see what I see." "What do you see?" Emily asked. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then, "A witness who cannot be rattled. That's rarer than you think." She paused. 9 o'clock. Don't be late." She hung up. Emily stood in the quiet garage holding her phone. She looked around at the space, the tools on their pegboards, the motorcycles in their positions, the chain hoist holding the latest project in suspension. She looked at all of it, and she thought about what Ghost had said. "You belong here." She thought about Tank's voice on her second day. "This garage takes care of its people." She thought about what she had understood slowly, and then all at once over 4 months, which was, this family is not the people who are required to keep you. Family is the people who choose to, and you know they've chosen because when the cost of choosing gets real, when there are lawyers and lawsuits and crowbars involved, they don't revise the choice. They show up with accordion files and bad coffee and hands steady enough to hand you a wrench in the middle of a crisis. She went upstairs. She got her notebook. She sat on her cot and she read through the 9 pages she'd written in Tank's office, And then she turned to a fresh page and wrote her statement for the DA. Clean, precise, chronological, every date she was certain of, every word she remembered, with confidence, every connection she could draw between Derek Paulson and the pressure on this garage, every fact that stood on its own 2 feet without requiring anyone to feel sorry for her. She wrote for 3 hours. When she was done, it was past midnight and her hand ached, and there were 14 pages and she was not afraid. She was ready. The thing about a war fought with paperwork and testimony instead of crowbars is that it is slower, but the damage it does is permanent. A man you fight with your hands can recover. A case built correctly brick by brick from a 17-year-old girl's careful memory and a lawyer's 72 hours of forensic accounting and a garage's 4 months of documented legitimate business that case does not recover from. That case goes in a file. It follows. It accumulates interest. Emily Carter was 17 years old and she had nothing left to lose except what she had found, and what she had found was worth every word she was about to say. Tomorrow morning, she would walk into a government building in the same jacket she'd worn the day she walked into Blackstone Garage, with her notebook and her 14 pages in her clearest voice, and she would tell the truth, and the truth was going to be enough. She turned off the lamp. She lay in the dark. From somewhere below, she heard the deep, settling sound of the garage around her structural patient, the sound of something built to last, and she closed her eyes and breathed, and she was still. Assistant D. A. Reeves was a man who had learned to read people the way mechanics read engines quickly, by sound and feel, looking for the thing that didn't run right. He sat across from Emily in a conference room that smelled like old coffee and fluorescent lighting, and he looked at her the way people look at things they haven't decided the value of yet. Patricia sat on Emily's left. Marcus sat on Patricia's left with the laptop and the accordion files. Tank was in the waiting room outside because Patricia had made the call correctly. Emily understood that his presence in the room would give Reeves an excuse to look at something other than the girl in front of him. Reeves looked at Emily's 14 pages. He looked at Patricia's documentation. He looked at Marcus's forensic trail through the Delaware LLC and its history of targets. Then he looked at Emily. "You're 17, he said. "Yes," Emily said. "And you've been employed at Blackstone Garage for how long?" 4 months and 12 days, Emily said. He looked at her steadily. "Miss Carter, I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer it exactly as you'd answer it to a jury. Not to me, not to your attorney, to 12 people who know nothing about you. Can you do that?" "Yes," she said. "Why should I believe that what happened to this garage is connected to what Derek Paulson did to you?" Emily looked at him. She had spent 3 hours the night before writing 14 pages so that she wouldn't have to search for this answer in the moment, so that it would be there the way a tool is there when you reach for it, exactly where it's supposed to be, exactly the right size. "Because the missing persons report, Paulson filed name Blackstone Garage specifically," she said. "He had no reason to know I was there unless someone told him. Someone told him because creating a story about a teenage girl in a biker garage was more useful to them than just filing a business complaint. It gave them a headline. It gave them a reason for police to show up and look around. It made the garage look like a problem before anyone examined the facts." She paused. "And the facts, when you examine them, are that I am a legally employed minor with documented income and a filed independent status petition working for a business with clean licensing and 11 years of operation. None of those facts helped Vargas Automotive, so they needed a different story." Reeves said nothing for a moment. He looked at her in a way that was different from how he'd looked at her when she walked in. "Walk me through the trust," he said. She walked him through the trust, every detail. The accident when she was 12, the settlement, the lock on access until 18, Derek's debt, the math of it, the ugly, simple, transactional math of a man who had fostered children for 6 years, not because he had love to give, but because there were numbers attached. When she finished, Reeves looked at Patricia. "The LLC documentation," he said. "Marcus," Patricia said. Marcus turned the laptop. For 20 minutes, Reeves and a colleague who had quietly joined the meeting looked at what Marcus had built, the trail of entities, the prior targets, the social media connections between the men who put Tank in the hospital, and a Vargas employee with a history that did not survive contact with public records. When Reeves looked up, something in his expression had settled into a different shape. "I'm going to need copies of everything," he said. "Already prepared," Marcus said, and slid a flash drive across the table. Reeves looked at Emily one more time. You understand that if we move forward, you may be called to testify in open court. I know, she said, and you're prepared for that. I've been prepared for harder things, she said. He nodded once, stood up, extended his hand, which he hadn't done when they walked in. We'll be in touch by end of week, Ms. Wells. Patricia shook his hand. End of week, she confirmed. In the hallway, Tank was standing with his arms crossed and his ribs still taped under his jacket. He looked at Patricia's face first because Patricia's face, Emily had learned, was the most reliable instrument in any room, and Patricia gave him a single nod and something in his shoulders dropped a fraction. He looked at Emily. How'd it go? He shook my hand when he left, she said. Tank looked at her for a moment. That's good. I know, she said. He put one hand briefly on her shoulder, the same gesture Big Jim had made at the break room table, brief and careful and asking permission while it gave it. And then he walked toward the exit and she followed. And outside, the November air hit her face and she breathed it and she felt something she hadn't felt in so long. She'd almost forgotten the word for it. She felt light, felt not fixed, not finished. The case wasn't closed. The lawsuit wasn't dismissed. Derek Paulson was still somewhere in the world with his debt in his calculation. But light, the specific lightness of having done the hardest thing available to you and come through it standing. She got into the truck beside Tank. He drove back toward Blackstone without speaking, which was fine because silence with Tank had never been uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that had room in it. After 3 minutes, she said, Patricia told me you called in a favor for her. She told you that, he said, not a question. She said you've done bigger ones for her. He kept his eyes on the road. She helped me keep this garage when my dad died and the estate was a mess and 2 creditors were trying to pull the whole thing apart. He changed lanes. I would have lost it without her. Everything that came after the shop, the guys, everything we built wouldn't exist. He paused. She doesn't let me pay her back in money. Says the garage existing is payment enough. Another pause. That used to feel like charity. Now I think it's just how she keeps score. Emily looked at him. Is that how you keep score too? She gestured between them. All of this, the room upstairs, the sandwiches. He was quiet for a moment. I keep score in what the garage is, he said finally. Every person who comes through and finds their footing, that's a point. That's the score. He glanced at her sideways. You're a point, Emily, a significant one. She looked out the window. The town of Millhaven moved past her, and she watched it, the streets she'd navigated. Hungry and invisible 4 months ago. The corner where the dollar store parking lot was the church on Maple with the kind-eyed woman and the unavailable beds. The same town, different weight. I want to learn more, she said. I want to learn everything Danny knows, and then I want to learn what you know. Tank said nothing for a second, then, that's going to take years. I'm not going anywhere, she said. He pulled into the garage lot and cut the engine and sat for a moment with both hands on the wheel. I know, he said, and the way he said it quiet, certain no performance in it, told her that he had known for a while and that it meant something to him that she'd said it out loud. They went inside. Danny was under a car as always, but he rolled out the moment he heard the door and stood up with grease on his face and both eyebrows raised in a question he was physically incapable of not asking. He shook her hand when he left, Tank said. Danny pointed at Emily. I knew it. I knew it. I said she'd go in there and be terrifying in the best possible way. I said that, Big Jim. I literally said that this morning. You said she'd be fine, Big Jim said from the bench, not looking up. You did not say terrifying. The subtext was terrifying. Danny looked at Emily with something so genuine it almost knocked her sideways. Are you okay? I'm good, she said. Are you actually good? Or are you saying you're good because that's what you do? She looked at him. 4 months ago, she would have said the second thing automatically. Actually good, she said. First time in a while. Danny nodded like she'd confirmed something important. Good, he said, because I have a transmission that's been arguing with me since 8 this morning, and I need a second opinion. She grabbed her jacket from the hook. She had a hook, or her own hook, between Danny's and the one Ghost never used, because Ghost's jacket was always either on him or nowhere, and she went to look at the transmission. Ghost appeared at 4 in the afternoon with news that arrived in his characteristic economy of words. Paulson dropped the missing persons report. Everyone stopped. When, Patricia said, she had come back at 3 with a revised filing strategy and was in the office when Ghost delivered this. This morning, Ghost said, before the DA meeting, he withdrew it. Emily stared at him. Why? Ghost looked at her. Because someone called him and told him the DA's office was looking into the trust and that if he pressed forward, he was going to become part of a fraud investigation. He paused. Someone made sure he understood the math. Who called him? Emily asked. Ghost said nothing. Ghost. She looked at him directly. You needed it handled, he said. Simply, without apology. Tank said from the office doorway, Ghost. It's done, Ghost said. It's clean. Paulson isn't a problem anymore. He looked at Tank with those watchful eyes. He was never the real problem. Tank held his gaze for a moment. Then he nodded once. Emily looked at Ghost, this quiet, watchful man she had spent 4 months being slightly uncertain about whose depths she had understood she was not going to fully map in any reasonable time frame. And she said, thank you. Ghost looked at her. For Ghost, what happened next was extraordinary. He held her gaze for a full 3 seconds before looking away, which was the closest he came to saying you're welcome in a language he actually spoke. Patricia from the office said, Marcus just got a call back from one of the prior Vargas targets, a garage owner in Ohio who settled 3 years ago. He's willing to talk to the DA. The room shifted again, another brick in the wall. This is happening, Danny said with the tone of someone watching something assemble itself that started as wreckage. It's been happening, Big Jim said. He looked at Emily with those quiet eyes. She started it the day she walked in here. I walked in here to mop floors, Emily said. And look what happened, Danny said. What happened next took 6 weeks. 6 weeks of motions and counter-motions of legal documents, traveling between desks of Patricia on the phone with Marcus every morning and the DA's office every afternoon. The Vargas civil suit hit the expedited discovery motion and stalled. Their attorneys filed for extensions, and Patricia opposed everyone, and a judge named Harlow, who had seen this particular LLC pattern before, moved through the docket with the energy of someone who had developed a personal objection to people wasting her court's time. The criminal referral went to a grand jury in week 4. The Ohio garage owner gave his statement in week 5. In week 6, the roll-up doors of Blackstone Garage were open on a Thursday morning when Patricia walked in with Marcus in a printed email that she set on the break room table in front of Tank without preamble. Tank read it. He read it again. Case dismissed, he said. Voluntarily, Patricia said. They withdrew the civil suit entirely at 8 this morning. She sat down. The LLC is under active criminal investigation. 2 of their attorneys withdrew from representation yesterday, which is usually the sign that the people paying them have stopped returning calls. Danny made a sound that was not quite a word. Big Jim sat down slowly. Ghost stood in the doorway and said nothing, which in Ghost language meant good. Tank looked at the email for another moment. Then he looked up at Emily, who was standing at the end of the table with her hands in her jacket pockets. He said, You did this. We did this, she said immediately. No, he said. We were doing what we always do, running a garage, keeping our heads down, being exactly what we are. You walked into that conference room and told the truth and built the thing that held it together. He held her gaze. Own it. She looked at him. She looked at Big Jim and Danny and Ghost and Patricia. She looked at the garage around her, the tools on their pegs, the engines in their states of progress, the chain hoist with its latest project, the hook on the wall with her jacket hanging on it, the break room table with 5 mismatched chairs, and a coffee maker that still hummed too loud. Okay, she said. She let herself own it, the weight of it, the shape of it. 6 weeks of testimony and truth-telling and 14 pages written past midnight with a hand that ached. 4 months of learning this place and being learned by it the first day, and the sandwiches and the question, did you eat today, that had cracked something open in her and let the rest follow. She owned it. Good, Tank said. He stood up. Now someone make a real pot of coffee, because that thing has been producing battery acid since 6 this morning, and I have an announcement. Danny pointed at Big Jim. Big Jim stood without argument and went to make coffee, which meant whatever Tank was about to say, Big Jim had already been told, which meant it was significant enough to prepare for. Tank waited until his coffee was made and cups were in front of everyone, and then he stayed standing because Tank processed important things standing up, and he said, I've been talking to the County Youth Services office for the past 3 weeks, before any of this was resolved. He looked around the table. There's a program, a formal one, automotive training for minors in transitional situations, foster care, aging out, at risk. 8-week course. Certified at the end. Real certification, state recognized. He paused. They need a host facility and they need instructors. I've agreed to both starting in the spring. Nobody spoke for a moment. How many kids? Big Jim said. First cohort 6. If it works, we scale. Tank looked at Danny. I need a dedicated instructor for the first run. Danny pointed at himself. You and Emily, Tank said. Emily looked up sharply. You'll co-instruct, Tank said. Danny handles the technical curriculum. You handle diagnostics in the intake, the part where you sit with a kid who doesn't believe they're capable and you help them see what they actually are. He looked at her without any performance in it. You're the only person in this building qualified for that specific job because you're the only one who remembers what it feels like to be sitting on the other side of it. She felt something move through her that she couldn't name cleanly. It wasn't pride exactly, or not only pride. It was more specific than that. It was the feeling of a thing you didn't know you were built for, turning out to be exactly what you were built for. Yes, she said, obviously yes. Danny was grinning so wide it looked structural. We're going to be so good at this. You're going to be adequate, Ghost said from the doorway. She's going to be good. Ghost, Danny said with feeling. It's a compliment to her, Ghost said. He looked at Emily. Something in his face, subtle and permanent, had shifted in the weeks since the conference room. You earned it. The spring program launched on a Tuesday morning with 6 teenagers who arrived the way Emily had arrived, carrying their histories like weight distributed wrong, looking at the garage with a mixture of wariness and something underneath the wariness that was trying very hard not to be hope. Emily stood at the front of the garage and looked at them and saw herself in every single one, and she felt the familiar pull of that, the recognition that could become pity if you let it, the thing you had to be careful with, the thing you had to translate into something useful rather than something sentimental. She said, I'm going to tell you one thing before we start, and then we're going to get to work, because this isn't a feelings class, it's a mechanics class. She paused. 4 months ago, I walked into this garage with $11 and a dead car, and I didn't know anyone here, and I was terrified, and I didn't show it because showing it felt like losing something I couldn't afford to lose. She looked at them, at their carefully assembled expressions, their determined neutrality, their readiness to be disappointed by one more thing. You don't have to show it here either, but you're allowed to. That's the difference between this place and most places. She let that sit for a moment. Any questions before we start? A girl in the back, maybe 15, with close cropped hair and an expression Emily recognized as the specific armor of someone who has been burned by hope, before raised her hand slightly. What if we're not good at this? Emily looked at her. Then you'll be bad at it first and better at it later, which is what everyone in this building has been at every point in their life. The girl lowered her hand. Something in her face shifted by a fraction. Okay, Emily said. Let's start with the basics. An engine is a problem-solving machine. Every sound it makes means something. Every problem it has a source. You find the source. She looked at each of them in turn. You fix the source. Everything downstream corrects. She picked up a wrench from the bench. She held it out. The girl in the back, after a beat, stood up and walked forward and took it. Good, Emily said. Now I'll show you what to do with it. 6 months after the case was dismissed, and 8 months after she'd walked through the front door with $11 in a body shaped entirely by survival, Emily Carter turned 18. She didn't make a big deal of it. She wasn't sure how. The birthday had always been a logistical marker more than a celebration, a date on a form, an age on a document, the specific number that had been keeping a wall between her and the trust she'd been protecting since she was 12. Patricia called at 9 in the morning. Happy birthday, she said. And also, I filed the trust access petition an hour ago. Standard processing is 7 to 10 business days, but given everything on record, I expect it faster. Thank you, Patricia, Emily said. Don't thank me yet, Patricia said. Wait until the money's in an account I set up for you. Then you can thank me. I'll send flowers. Send lunch, Patricia said. I haven't eaten since 6. She hung up. Emily stood in the garage. It was before opening 7 in the morning. Just her and the space and the sound of the space heater upstairs still running, and she thought about what 18 meant. Not the trust, not the legal change in her status. The actual fact of it that she had gotten here, that she was standing in a garage in Millhaven, Tennessee, with her name on a liability form and her jacket on a hook, and 6 teenagers coming through the roll-up doors twice a week who looked at her the way she'd once looked at Tank, like she was something solid in a world that had previously had very little of solid in it. She heard footsteps on the stairs behind her. Tank came down, coffee in both hands, moving without the careful rib management that had defined his movement for 2 months. He'd healed the way he did everything quietly and without announcement. He handed her one of the coffees. She took it. "You knew what today was," she said. "I know what day everyone in this building was born," he said. "Occupational hazard of running a family." She looked at him. "Is that what this is?" Osam. He looked back at her with those steady dark eyes. "What do you think it is?" She thought about the break room table, the 5 mismatched chairs, Danny's off-key singing, Big Jim's twice measured precision, Ghost's 3 seconds of held eye contact that meant more than other people's paragraphs, the hook on the wall with her jacket. "Family," she said. He nodded once. He raised his coffee. She raised hers. They didn't say anything else, which was right, because some things don't need more than that. A cup of coffee shared at 7 in the morning before the doors open and the work starts between 2 people who found each other in a broke-down parking lot, in a handwritten sign, in a question nobody had asked her before. "Did you eat today?" 4 words. That was all it had taken. And what had followed those 4 words was this: a roof, a wrench, a lawyer, a truth told in a conference room, 6 kids learning to read an engine, a birthday with coffee and no ceremony, a hook on the wall that said, "You are here, you belong here, you are not going anywhere." The world had told Emily Carter to stay away from the bikers at Blackstone Garage. She hadn't listened. She had walked through the door anyway with her $11 and her empty stomach and her survival instincts running on fumes, and what she found on the other side of that door was the only thing she had ever actually needed. Not a job, not a roof, not even a wrench, though the wrench mattered. A family that chose her on purpose and never not once revised the choice. That was the whole of it. That was the truth. And it was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.